later on. So welcome to the Museum of the City of New York. My name is Fran Rosenfeld, and I'm the Director of Public Programs. Thank you for joining us for tonight's conversation, Feminists in Fashion, with Norma Kamali and Christene Barberich. This program is part of our series planned in conjunction with our current exhibition, Beyond Suffrage, A Century of Women in New York Politics, which, if you haven't seen, is a wonderful exhibition on our third floor, which will be on view through July. And we invite you after this talk to join us one flight upstairs in our rotunda for a glass of Prosecco. We're honored to have tonight New York designer Norma Kamali and co-founder and editor-in-chief of Refinery 29, Christene Barberich, here with us for a conversation with the curator of Beyond Suffrage, Dr. Sarah Seidman, and they're going to be discussing the relationship between, the impact of feminism on fashion, past and present. And we're going to invite them to the stage in just a second, but I'd like to thank the promotional partners for tonight's event. You can see a complete list of them in your printed program. Appreciate their support very much. And I'd like to invite you back to the museum for the next program in our Beyond Suffrage series. It's on June 9th, a Saturday, June 9th at 10:30 a.m. It's called Radical Roots, Harlem's Women Activists, and it's a multimedia bus tour and walking tour of Harlem, East Harlem, Central and West, to delve into the neighborhood's rich history of feminist and female activism. So please check us out online to find out more. I'd like to ask you to turn off anything that buzzes or beeps, but feel free to tweet tonight with the hashtag MCNYLive. And I'm now going to introduce our speakers. First, in alphabetical order, we have Christene Barberich. She's the global editor-in-chief and co-founder of the award-winning women's media company Refinery 29. She's also the New York Times best-selling author of Style Stalking and the host and creator of the acclaimed podcast Unstyled. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Travel and Leisure, and New York Magazine. Norma Kamali has been an innovator, inventor, and pioneer in the fashion industry since 1967. Her brand focuses on women's fitness, empowerment, health, beauty, style, and entrepreneurship. Kamali also leads Stop Objectification, an awareness campaign with the goal of inspiring women to free themselves from the insidious effects of objectification through sharing their stories. And last but not least, our moderator tonight is Dr. Sarah Seidman. She is the museum's Puffin Foundation Curator of Social Activism and the curator of Beyond Suffrage, the exhibition. And now, won't you please join me in welcoming the three of them to our stage?
Thank you, Fran, and thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm Sarah Seidman, as Fran mentioned, here with Christene Barberich and Norma Kamali, and I'm so honored to have you both here and to see all of you in here in this packed house tonight. Very exciting. So I'm honored to moderate this conversation in light of our recent shows, Mod New York, curated by Phyllis Madison and Donald Albrecht, which trace transformations in clothing from 1960 to about 1973 and juxtapose these clothes within the broader social changes taking place during the 60s, and which just closed like a week ago. But there is a book, I should mention, in the shop, and Beyond Suffrage, which is still open up on the third floor, and a show that I curated, A Century of New York Women in Politics, which commemorates the 100th anniversary of when women won the right to vote in New York State. So it opened last fall. The anniversary was 1917 to 2017, and it traces the subsequent 100 years of New York women in government and on the front lines of grassroots activism fighting for power and equality. And I just wanted to share a few images from these two shows and from our broader image archive that I think will give us a bit of context about the relationship between fashion, expression, and politics before we move into our conversation. Okay, so on the left, we have an image we've used, I think in a few shows here, from 1917, so the year women won the right to vote in New York State, and just the importance of clothing in women's activism and mobilizations, be it the colors they wore, like often white, or the skirt length, which is, above the ankle here ever so slightly, which was, fairly revolutionary for the time, and just women being out and visible in public spaces in the early 20th century was, especially in mass, was fairly novel and subversive. And on the right, Coco Chanel, and, her more direct path-breaking role in women's fashion and clothing in the post-World War I period. So then skipping to the kind of post-World War II period and looking at everything from undergarments to clothing in the mod New York period, be it less constricting corsets and underwear to the kind of free-flowing or, slinky clothing Halston. So these are images from mod. And then, connecting those, we were talking about Helen Gurley Brown and Gloria Steinem, right? So different women on some intersecting paths. So we have this image up in Beyond Suffrage of Gloria Steinem, Bella Abzug, Shirley Chisholm, and Betty Friedan, who are all involved in the women's liberation movement. And then on the right, a hat worn by Bella Abzug by Norma Kamali. Bella Abzug was known for her hats, and all of these women, Shirley Chisholm, Gloria Steinem, definitely had strong opinions about fashion and made statements by what they wore. And we have several articles of clothing in the show. Please come back and take a look. It's up through the first week of August. And here are two installation images from the last section of the show that looks at the 1980s through today. So we have two suits, a suit dress worn by Geraldine Ferraro when she accepted the nomination for vice president in 1984 on the Democratic ticket. And I think she's wearing white very purposefully to invoke the history of suffragists. And then pantsuit worn by Hillary Clinton from 2001. She wore this one when she was sworn in as senator from New York State, which she was the first woman senator from New York. And so just thinking about, this huge range of clothing and history, just as a bit of context. But really, I want to give the floor to these two accomplished and iconic women to discuss their experiences and views on the relationship between fashion and feminism more broadly. I think our programming for Beyond Suffrage is an opportunity to take notions of gender and equality and feminism in broader directions than exhibition is able to do. And so thinking through the relationship between fashion and feminism. So that all said,
that was awesome.
Thank you. You're right about being very, very supportive. So I'd love to hear from each of you how you got into the work that you did and how you entered the world of fashion and kind of women's lifestyle and identity through fashion and style, and how notions of gender and equality and feminism might have influenced you at the beginning. So Norma, I know you have been such an important person for since the 60s, and would love to hear your thoughts on this to get us started. So thank you.
I think there was this big switch turned when the Mad Men style of dressing, a la the corset, phased out, and the 60s came in, and there was a free spirit Corsets came off. Anything that was matching no longer made sense. Having matching gloves, hats, shoes, everything sort of corseted and shaped no longer was meaningful. And the spirit of a generation of baby boomers who were just going to redefine everything was so clear, and fashion was probably one of the strongest symbols of this freedom. So the undergarments were clearly one of the first steps in saying, I'm either going to wear nothing under my clothing or something that's sort of like a soft t-shirt. You also have to remember Lycra wasn't developed at that point to the way we know it now. So there were soft attempts, but it was very early in that sort of free feeling. I think the 60s started a new kind of view of feminism in the way women dressed and described themselves. And that, to me, was my inspiration, to answer your question. Prior to that, I hated everything about fashion, and I just thought I'm going to wear overalls before, or vintage something, before I put any of that on. And then when I saw the ultimate opportunity for creativity to do anything you want at any time, I was in the right place at the right time.
I also have a really good story about Norma, though. I have many good stories about Norma. We actually met probably like 4 years ago on a photo shoot, and having been one of the co-founders of my company, I didn't have a lot of mentors within my company that I could really lean on, and it was really interesting. After the photo shoot, she started asking questions about my company, about digital media. She's just such a curious and sort of infinitely ambitious person, always trying to learn and expand her knowledge. And I remember I had her on my podcast, Unstyled, and she told me this great story about like when, as she was becoming or thinking about becoming a designer, and she would literally sew herself into her pants when she would go out at night and bring a needle and thread and put it in her pocket, and then she would like undo all the threading so she could go to the bathroom, and then literally like stitch herself up in her pants again, and then just, continue with the evening. And I just remember thinking like, that is an enterprising person that I want to know more about. Remember thinking like, I was like thinking it's so dangerous to go dancing with a needle and thread in your pocket, but
a seam ripper.
And a seam ripper. But I think that I've always admired Norma, not because I'm a vintage enthusiast and I've collected her work for a long time, and she cares zero about it. She cares, meaning she is just like not nostalgic about the past at all, and I think that is what has made you such a futurist in a lot of ways. But I think that the way that Norma has introduced a way of seeing women's bodies and how women felt in clothes was so revolutionary, and like doing an entire collection out of sweatsuit material. Sweatsuit material is not appealing to the male gaze, but not really caring about that and thinking about like, what do women need to function at their highest capacity? And I think that's something I've always been in search of, as an entrepreneur and as someone that loves fashion deeply. But I think that that's just something that has very distinguishing about her, and not a lot of designers have such a long legacy. I mean, she's still like, I think it's amazing when Beyonce wears her stuff, or Rihanna, and it's just like she's a radically relevant person, and I think that that's like what great fashion is. It's true. All
right,
I like
I'm gonna say.
No.
I'm gonna say that the reason I asked so many questions when we met was because I've met a lot of women in my career, in my lifetime, and I can always spot electricity. I can always spot someone special. And So when we met, I said, I want to know everything about this woman. She is so electric. She is very funny, too. So you have to be smart to be funny. And so I knew immediately that this was really a special woman. And she is political in the pursuit of providing women with information that's going to help them grow on a lot of levels. And she created something that, to me, is as revolutionary now as, back to Helen Gurley Brown. I thought she was a revolutionary. And Christene understands not only what Helen Gurley Brown did in the revolution in the 70s, but she understands the potential of media in this time, which makes her extremely powerful in her telling a story, whenever it is. And I am as much an admirer as you are me, in that I see so much of the future in what you are doing and what you're inspiring other women to do. So the conversation really is on how we have found our path and what we are doing, because we love women and we really want to give them everything we have. So I'm happy to present.
I love this.
The electric.
I know, right?
Where you can just answer each other's questions. I think that's a perfect.
I could
We're
literally
not
just
good
sit
together.
here and tell you all the great stories I know about Norma. And literally, it was like when I was meeting her, I was like, "Do you think I'll ever be able to see her inside her closet?" I wanted to see if she had the archive. And I do remember once texting her from. I was at the Pasadena flea market. I've told this story a bunch of times, and I found a beautiful pair of mint, white leather studded pumps. They look like they would be Balenciaga today. I mean, there's no question. They were so beautiful. They were like a size 6.5. I did not buy them. I wanted to buy them, but they were in perfect condition, and I took a picture of them. And sometimes I just want to just remind her that her ideas have endured so beautifully. And I think that something that we are both willing to do, that I think that is important when we're talking about fashion and politics or fashion and feminism, is to be willing to present the unpopular idea sometimes, is to be okay about going out with something like a sweatsuit collection that could literally be sort of panned and mocked and sort of, but I think having the courage to be able to kind of present an idea that has legs to it. Anyway, so I texted her the picture, and I said, "Oh my God, look at what I found." And do you know what she texted me back? I'm going to tell you. She said, "I don't want to see that shit." I don't want to see that shit. And she was just like, she's just someone that doesn't look back. And I was like, all right, I know, it was really funny. I so wish I still had that text. It was just
No, I would be quoted.
I know.
Luckily, there are museums who are
Oh, are we allowed
collected
to
your
swear?
work.
I'm sorry.
and
I'm sorry. We're allowed to swear.
You
I'm sorry
can say
about that.
whatever you want in here.
Yeah.
I think. Right. Clearly, there are collectors of your work. So what other values do you think makes you have such a close affinity in your work, be it a kind of media empire and fashion and also wellness empire? I mean, it seems like you have a lot of shared values, and I'd love to hear more about that.
For me personally, one of the motivations to start Refinery 29, and it's a reason why I have such a kinship with someone like Norma, is I didn't see myself reflected in women's media. I felt like one of those people that was on the outside looking in. There wasn't a magazine that I really related to, that I felt like I saw myself in the pictures. And I just believed that there were other women like me that were smart and interesting and wanted more out of life. And, I think that also wanted to talk about tough topics. We call them tough topics at Refinery 29, and they're things that are somehow considered shameful, like miscarriage or mental illness, or the sort of banishing of the word diet, diets. And I think that taking up space, like I still get press releases about 16 days to beach body. It's like, oh my God, it's like, what's going to happen if you don't have a beach body in 16 days? And it's like, I've never had a beach body, and I'm fine. I still go to the beach, but I think this chronic message, I just wear a hat. And I think that it's just this constant sort of, relentless messages. I'm speaking on behalf of women in particular, because that's our audience, about telling them that they're just constantly not good enough, that you're never going to sort of reach this sort of place where you can actually sort of participate in the world and thrive. And I didn't agree with that. And it's been such an incredible education to go box by box, every category of our audience's lives, when it comes to money, when it comes to sex and sexuality, when it comes to spirituality and religion, all these sort of taboo subjects that women just don't talk about, or people don't talk about in the context of women. And that was such rich territory for me. And I think that Norma always represented a woman that I wanted to become. And I didn't have a lot of those role models growing up, and women that I actually had access to, that I could ask for advice. I mean, she's been an incredible professional sage, but she cares about my whole person. And it makes me so emotional, because if we get together, she'll ask me how is everything, with my husband, or how's your health? And we spent our whole last lunch talking about our health. And it was just our doctor's visits. And I think that there is an authenticity there that needs to happen in order for women to feel power in a community. And fashion is really a tool for that, because we were talking in the back, and I think we're seeing it a lot with collections like Dior, and now with, protests becoming so urgent and essential, to be able to have a place where you can go with people that you care about to, to sort of even just support causes that you care about, or to protest an idea that you don't believe in, whether it's, sort of gun control. I mean, believing in gun control. But I think that fashion has always played such a powerful role in allowing us to communicate the things that we can't always communicate with words. We haven't always had a platform. Social media is essentially very new. When we launched Refinery 29 in 2005, Twitter wasn't even around. No one knew what was coming. We didn't know what was coming and how we were going to be socializing messages and content. And I think it's just been this great experiment with Refinery 29, is testing ideas in our audience and seeing what comes back to us with this feedback. And a lot of times it is just relief. It is relief. It is sort of this watershed moment of women writing to us in comments, talking to each other, that they have found their people, that there has been this dark, terrible secret that they've been keeping. And I don't have a beach body, what am I going to do? And it's just, it's such, I think, an unnecessary use of energy. And I think that when you can put women in a situation where they can feel validated, where they can see themselves reflected back at, in an ad or a magazine spread or a website, it's these subliminal messages that tell them that they matter, that they are being heard and they're being seen. And I think that that's really, really powerful.
Absolutely. There's so much to think about there. Yeah, Norma.
I think another thing to think about with fashion and feminism is we as women definitely express ourselves through our clothing. We tell the story of who we are, or who we think we are, or who we want people to think we are. I think there are camps, and there's the modern sort of body type. That's I work out, I'm athletic, I'm about fitness, I'm about wellness, and that's projected in maybe the kind of active / uniform she wears, or how she incorporates that into the way she dresses. And then there's the Kim Kardashian type body, and that's a very popular body projection. That's a very popular way to dress for a lot of people. And that's another woman saying, this is who I am, this is what I want to project, this is what the reaction I want to get from you. And then for those of us who have fashion influence and are in that mindset, and we see color, texture, pattern, and we find it appealing to express ourselves through what we enjoy about fashion, that's another presentation. And there are other iterations, but I think it's very important, and I do think it's political, to understand the choices we make as women and how we want to tell our story through the clothing we wear. I think we're dressing for, obviously, there are still a lot of women dressing for men. There are a lot of women watching Bachelor. I still don't understand that. And then there are women who are saying, I'm dressing for me, I'm doing this for me, or I'm dressing for other women. So there's a very complicated network of communication in how we present ourselves. But one of the things that's really important is we have a tool to say who we are, and we can change our minds. We can say, you know what, my life doesn't work that way anymore. Maybe I'm dressing like Kim Kardashian and I don't want to anymore, and I want to have a more sober, laid back, quiet life. I want a different way to say who I am. We have clothing and we have fashion as that communicative tool, and that's really important. It doesn't sound like it's so important, but I think it gives us a power to say something when we may not be able to articulate who we are, unless you're doing it through a refinery where you can interact with a story, you can interact with someone who's writing something and saying, yeah, that's me too. So I think we're looking for a voice in so many parts of our lives, and clothing and our feminist nature is expressed through how we present ourselves.
Yeah, and I think it's right. It's so interesting that you've mentioned these, different body ideals or different interests, and of course, women are not a monolith, and that's something we've thought about in the Beyond Suffrage show. We have women across the ideological spectrum, or women who are leading the anti-suffrage movement in New York, which just seems sort of crazy, but. So thinking through how women are not the same and disagree with each other and have different views, and just thinking about fashion as not necessarily one thing or another, but as a mode of communication seems so constructive. And yeah, I was just wondering if you could each say a little more about that. If is fashion inherently political, or is it more about thinking about the women who are either creating the clothes or writing about clothes, or style more broadly, or wearing them? Should we be focusing more on the kind of labor practices of the fashion industry, or the environmental justice aspect? I guess is fashion liberatory or repressive in terms of these societal modes? I know this is like 100 different questions, but I think it's all kind of under like a larger rubric of what is, its potential for good or not.
Well, one thing that I think we can clearly state is that fashion does not define the woman, even though it may be the message she wants to send. And a great example of this is people always say to me, you're so pro-women, but you make these tiny, sexy bathing suits. And the truth is, if you look at, it's all about the power we individually have, all right? So if you are looking at an Olympic volleyball match, the women in that volleyball match have on the tiniest, tiny bikinis. That same bikini can be worn maybe in a music video where the woman is being objectified by the song and maybe by the performance. It's the same bathing suit, but the power that's expressed by that woman overrides what she's wearing. So it really, in the end, is here. It's who we are, it's how we think, and how we express ourselves. The clothing sort of adds another nuance to that, says, this is the story I'm telling today with what I'm wearing, and you are a suffragette today.
I know, I'm such a modest dresser. I'm like really happy that modest dressing is like, it's, for me, it's not a religious act, and I respect, people that dress for, modestly for religious reasons, but I'm always like, yes.
No, but she does it extraordinarily. I mean, she is really...
Well, that's like a good segue, because I think that, for me personally, I think that something that I've noticed that I think has been a big change, it's almost like what Norma was talking about in the 60s, is kind of the man-repelling movement. And I think that fashion has so long been a tool for, to be, sort of be desired through the male gaze. And dressing for a man, or, getting ready, and sort of imagining like what sort of like this person would want you to be wearing. And, I do credit Leandra Medine, who launched Man Repeller, with finally coining it and, giving it a destination, in that fashion is about what you want to wear and not worrying so much about like what other people are going to think. And I always think about Diane Keaton in Baby Boom, and there's that great scene when she's like, she's coming back from the country, and she's got her like, she's got her country baby, off her. It's like, and she's coming back up to the Seagram building, and her shoulder pads are like out to here. And she just looks powerful, but it's also sort of like this idea of emulating a man. It's like feminine enough. And I always thought that was so, even as a younger person, when I first saw that movie, I remember thinking like, you still have to look like a dude. It's like I can wear a cinched belt, but I still have to look like a linebacker. And to be taken seriously. And that's never been something that I've ever understood. It doesn't sort of compute for me. So when I go to Fashion Month, when I go to Europe, or Paris and Milan, and obviously the street style sort of industry is very sort of alive and really profitable now. A lot of women dress, and are influencers, and have very big careers as influencers, and are being photographed by really famous photographers. And what I love is that a lot of them dress in, they're completely covered. They're wearing like oversized men's suits, and they're not dressing in a particularly classically provocative way. It's like they're really just dressing and wearing what's comfortable, what's cool, what they think is cool. And I think that this sort of move away from this sort of idealist kind of feminine sort of mystique, it's not even a mystique, but this sort of image of idealism, it's nice that there are choices for young people. And I think that also gender plays a role in that now as well. And it's just a really interesting time that the sort of male gaze is not dictating, what women feel they have to wear.
I think it's so, I can't remember the last time I wore a top where you would possibly see below here. And I'm obviously not a prude in the kinds of clothes I make, but I do think more and more the distraction of breasts in a business meeting, or even with a group of women, it's like, I don't know that that is a conscious thing we're doing now, but more and more I find it's not so much being covered up, it's just feeling good about not having to be vulnerable and not having to present yourself in a vulnerable way. And I think when you are wearing something low cut, it's almost like the vulnerability of a Marilyn Monroe. There is something, that was what was appealing about her. She was vulnerable. She was sort of this symbol of something a man could dominate. And I think we don't want that. It's just, it's not smart and it doesn't feel right. So culturally, I think this is becoming more and more a movement. But I do think Kim Kardashian has a story to tell too, and that is valid. And I congratulate her for how she's taken her power and created a huge, powerful company. But she did it through what she felt was her story, and it's very successful. So there's nothing wrong with either one. It's just that they're quite different. But there is more of a modern sort of look about feminism and being smart and being presented in a way where you want your story to be told through your telling, not through something else that's subliminal.
And I think also, like, that there's no judgment. It's like, if you want to dress like Kim Kardashian, that's right. Awesome. If you want to dress like, you know, a suffragette, you know, that's great too. Mm-hmm. It's like, I think the point is that we want to widen this example of, you know, to everyone that, you know, if they feel good, if they feel like this is a true expression of their identity and this makes them feel their best, that is the point. That to me is like the role of fashion, is that it really gives you this sort of this support to be, you know, operating in the best conceivable way. And that's functionality, that's, you know, that's the way that it looks, that it appeals to you, it fits your lifestyle. And I think that putting these limitations on people about how they should look, and if you don't look this way, then you don't, you know, that's not good, and you're not going to get all the things that you want in the world, and it's just too much pressure. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that this trying to adopt a practice of not judging people for their choices is really important. And I applaud people that want, you know, to wear, you know, low-cut things. That's fine. I think that's great, but I don't think a woman should feel judged if she doesn't want to, you know, and or that she's not sort of dressing like a woman. I think that that's silly.
So there's more options now, and maybe a more diverse sense of what it means to dress as a woman. I mean, what else do you think has changed since you both are each entered, you know, the fashion world? Clearly a lot, and maybe some things have stayed the same, but I'd love to hear other things.
I think it's almost beyond fashion. One thing I've noticed, and I'm sure you notice the same, is that every time you hear a woman's story, there are so many incredible stories that are so powerful. We each have a movie. We each have a story that you could do a film about. There isn't one of us that has a life that's so still that nothing has happened. So when we learn and we are able to express ourselves, which we are doing now, women are telling each other their secrets. They're telling those dark things that have sort of held them hostage. All of that is coming out, and we're freer about expressing that. When you look at a woman's face who is telling you about who she is and her life and her trials and her glory, she becomes powerful and beautiful in a way that takes her so far and so in such an expressive way that you think she is more beautiful than she can possibly ever know, and what she's wearing all of a sudden is not as important as the face, the expressions, and the story. And then everything else comes together. But it is more about women speaking up, telling those dark secrets, going into those places that have been so painful for us. And I know when we have an open conversation, it's like, oh, that was so good. We feel good. Okay, till next time. We'll catch up then. But we are having them with other women. We're expressing ourselves. That's the healthiest thing we can do. From a political point of view and a feminist point of view, we are all feeding each other in this feminist time in a way that's never happened before. We're not competitive the way we used to be. And I will tell you, there is a big difference. We really, in general, I would say, support each other. We want everybody to do well. There are very few women who are those mean girl types anymore. If they are, they're quiet because they know we'll take them down.
It's true. I think that theory about scarcity, I think it is something that has been sort of conditioned into, at least for women, is that there's like only so many promotions, there's only so many eligible men. It's like you only have this many years before, you know, everything's over if you haven't had children. It's like there's just so much restriction in a young woman's life, you know, when she's looking ahead. And I think that it's our jobs to really try to allow people to see all the opportunities that they have available to them, even if they're not being reminded in other places in their lives, and that they have everything they need to succeed. It's like our job to obviously provide great tools and information and education and connection to other voices and people with influence that can help them. But I think that starting from a place of lack, like you can't, like you're already like, you know, you're never going to have what it takes in order to compete in this world. So why even bother? I think it's just a terrible message to be drilled into you, you know, time and time again. And I still, like I said about the press release, I still see cover lines, you know, on magazines at checkout. And I just, you know, it just makes me sad. It makes me sad that even subliminally we're walking past it. We might not be buying it, but we're thinking about it. And it's just something that we have to sort of train ourselves to remind that I have the power, like I am in control. And, you know, the choices that we make through fashion are a big part of that. So.
Right, so there's more alternatives, even if some of the more mainstream narratives or publications or maybe even clothing, you know, is still out there with some of the same messages. And I'm curious, right, we've talked about bodies a fair amount, just thinking about like gender identity and how the public discourse anyway about gender identity has changed so much. And just thinking through how that has impacted, you know, the fashion industry, creating clothes, gender neutral clothing, or telling those stories, or, you know, representing women. I know you've talked about with, you know, more body inclusivity, with more race and ethnic diversity. So I'd love to hear more about, you know, exciting work on that topic.
Well, we've been, years ago, I did a collection for Walmart for 3 years. And I've told you, it's one of my best experiences. And in that collection, I was asked to do plus sizes. And I thought, oh my God, I've spent my whole life about dancers' bodies and about being fit and, you know, all of the anatomical wonders that I studied through Michelangelo's work, and now they're asking me to do plus sizes. Oh my God. And so I got one of those mannequins for plus size into the office so I could really sort of get into the proportion and understand how different I would have to look at the human form. And then I stepped away from it and I said, my job is to give this woman dignity and to give her designer clothing. Designs don't cost anything, but give her designer clothing that she can wear every day, anywhere, and make it beautifully, and do every detail in that garment in a way that says, this is respectful. And I really had such a good time doing that, because the inspiration to make her feel good about herself prevailed over everything. And that really is what we want to do for anybody who's wearing clothing. So I feel the direction of clothes that we can all wear, that anybody can wear, man, women, any body type, that more of those clothes are going to become the new kind of staple. It's just, for example, jeans or t-shirts sort of fit in that. But I think that there's a whole new conversation about the kinds of clothes that you can wear. I love wearing men's clothes. I consider myself very feminine, but I love the fact that the male vision of clothing is the counter to who I am internally. I am truly feminine. I love being female. I love the power a woman has, the potential she has. But there's something about the contradiction of wearing something very neutral that feels powerful too, that I can project many images about myself. So I think men will want to wear more feminine things, not in the way they did in the 70s. In my shop in the 70s, in 1975, we did a calculation, and 50% of our customers were men buying women's clothing. And it wasn't to dress, it wasn't for drag at all. It was this new freedom men had, just like the new freedom women were having. And they would come in and wear jersey wrap dresses over jeans or over pants. They would put themselves together. Let me tell you, ladies, it was pretty fabulous. I mean, like, oh my God, the style and the creativity. So that, and a lot of rock stars wore my tops and wore, the New York Dolls wore my clothes completely. So there's something that can happen again, not in the same way, but I think it's about to happen. And I think we're going to see it evolve in a very clever way, in a very smart, practical, convenient, commodity but not really way. And I'm looking forward to being a part of that. I love that idea.
That's great. Christene, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think everything you touched on, I think is special and important. And I think, we did a piece.
I need to get this slideshow
we don't have
going.
to go there because I think we're out of time anyway. But we did a piece recently on, these trans models, and just hearing their stories was so incredible. Don't worry about it. It's okay. We did it.
Technologically deficient.
And the, hearing from them about just not wanting to be fetishized or tokenized. And I think that that's sort of like the great sort of evolution, the time that we're in right now is that, if you're other, it doesn't make you less than, or it's like this no otherness, and I think that is such an important message that people, like I said, don't feel singled out, or that, gender is the only thing about them. They have these incredible histories, these incredible stories of their families, and I think that has to do, it's the same with older women, also feeling like they're somehow tokenized. And I think that, and I also think that plus size in a way, I think that this sort of and also even like maternity wear. It's like, how has maternity wear never evolved? That's always sort of baffling to me. And there are these like parts of like, of our lives that are so, sort of relevant and important. And I think it's our jobs to sort of like draw light to them so we can sort of, make everybody feel like they belong and that they can really operate, in the best conceivable way.
Dignity is the word. It's really the word for every category you just mentioned. And if we keep that in mind, I think that really is the end result you want. You want people to feel good about themselves. You never want them to feel humiliated or embarrassed or less than. So everything we can do is to provide an opportunity for dignity for anybody.
Well, I think that's an amazing note for us to wrap up on before we take questions. I feel like, I don't know, just you're both so inspirational. I feel more positive about our moment perhaps than I have in some time, because I think, there's so many challenges in our current political landscape, and certainly in the show upstairs, we end on a note, kind of a mixed bag with, women aren't as represented in politics formally, and there's not parity in pay, and there's so many challenges left, but
we didn't
certainly
even talk about pay equity. I mean,
right.
That's like, or the pink tax,
Totally.
or all these like crazy sort of like discriminatory sort of practices that are still in place that.
Right.
It's like, how are we still talking about pay equity?
Totally. And we could have so many conversations about these. But I think, for our exhibition, I think there's overlap here just about the recent wave of women mobilizing in a very public way. And I think, drawing on so many of the kind of things that you're talking about and portraits of women and options that women have. So thank you for, being such positive forces, I think, and at this moment. And yeah, we'd love to open it up for questions to talk more about these topics. So raise your hand, and then someone will come around with a mic. Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much for this thought-provoking conversation. So I guess something that jumped out with me, themes of like kind of as the suffragette movement and as women became more just out there, it seemed like clothing was becoming less and less. Yeah, like the removing of the corsets and things were less restricting. And that was a moment of power. And I even think about like in middle school, like going to the dance and like finally being able to like feel adult enough and like wear a tank top versus like a t-shirt that my mom put me in. And that was like a moment of power for me. So then that made me think like, well, a lot, like there's this conversation of like women are asking for it when they dress with less clothing, and how that power is like taken away from the woman who's choosing to maybe dress more provocatively or sexually and present her power with less clothing. So how do you hone the power? How do you reclaim power, even if you want to dress sexually?
I can answer that. I think it's back to those Olympic volleyball players. It's really what you project. And I don't think it, I think clothing is saying, I want to say this, but like I said before, it's really what you project, what you say, how you say it, the way you stand, the way you communicate in every way, that you are defining what you want people to know. And if it is sort of that projecting an image of being accessible, maybe you want to be accessible. That's okay too. There's no law against that. That's power in itself. You're saying, this is what I want. But if you don't want to be, you have the power of communication. So you can say that too. Maybe you want to be accessible, but not to everybody. So I think clothing plays a role. we can use it to say we want to be accessible, or we want respect, or we want whatever. But our mouths, our body language, the way we communicate is in the end the final word. So, and I'm not against saying you want to be accessible. That's power too. So it's the choice you make when you make it, and understanding consequences either way. But women should have the right to make any of those decisions, and that to me is the most important thing.
Great. Other questions? Yes.
I'm wondering about, as professionals, do female designers have equal opportunities as male designers? Excuse me for a second, I'm just going back to Studio 54 when the fashion designers were the celebrities more than the actors or the musicians. It was Calvin Klein, it was
Halston.
Halston, and meanwhile everybody's wearing Norma's clothes to dance in. Do I have that right?
Well, I was lucky that people were wearing my clothes. I actually, even though I've read that I've been at Studio 54 lots of times, I'd never gone to Studio 54. But my clothes did. And you're right, the 70s were very exciting. It was, in my estimation, the highest point of the fashion industry as far as notoriety and respect for the designer. Not because of Studio 54, but because New York at the time was in terrible straits. There's the fear of living in New York. I remember after sundown, I would walk in the middle of the street because I didn't want to walk on the sidewalks. I didn't want to be attacked. My store had gates upon gates and alarm systems and monitors everywhere, and at least once a month it was broken into, and in the middle of the night I'd have to go. It was very difficult, very dangerous. So the rents were really low. You can come and live in New York from any town, anywhere, and if you were gay and just realizing that you may be able to be in a safe place if you came to New York, you came to New York. If you were creative and different from everybody else in your town, you came to New York. And so all of that talent, this strange talent was coming to New York and mixing then with the very rich and the very sort of society group that could afford to live in New York. And so Studio 54 was sort of the place where you saw it all come together. But what was happening is every store, every collection, every window, everywhere you looked, there was inspiration and design, and we would get together and communicate about our excitement and share exciting ideas together. And it was a smaller community at the time, but the energy and the creativity has never been the same. It's still great in other ways, but you're right. That was the peak of celebrity for fashion designers, and I've never seen anything as powerful since.
I want to just add something to that, because I think that was a great question, but I think that that sort of imbalance in terms of, or like a shortage of women designers, I think that that's like relevant for a lot of industries. If you look at the film industry, it's, why are we not seeing more female directors? And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're not getting funding. So you can't just look at who's the front-facing person of a brand. You have to look back layers and see who's actually, systemically, the fact that women get, a sort of such a minute percentage of the funding, to when they're raising money to build companies that men do in this country. And that's not just exclusive to fashion, that's any industry. So I think you have to think about how there's more there's more sort of balance, throughout, throughout an entire company, not just who's actually representing it, because those are the decision makers. They're the ones that are around the table deciding, who gets to do what. And I think we have to have more women in those conversations, making sure that they can get the funding they need to make a film. They can actually sort of like get an advisor on board that they need to in order to, sort of get in front of somebody else. And I think that that's just, I think that that's kind of reflective of a lot of things, not just fashion.
Yeah, these are such good points, and thank you for bringing it back to New York, because I meant to ask about, as the Museum of the City of New York, how the city, has provided fertile ground for your work. I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
Questions or comments?
Okay.
I just really want to keep hands down on what you just said right now with the word power, because clothing, in general, also is being used as a manipulation from men to women on what should you wear, what you should not wear. And as a woman that wears a headscarf, not all my life, I just started wearing it 10 years ago, it has made me look into history. And I said, okay, so, and I came to the finding that the headscarf has been used way before religion as a manipulation for women. But what you just said right now is just brought so much light, because this is something that I can really relate to. It's taking the power, right? Whether you want to dress modestly, whether you don't want to, whatever you want to wear. Now I think that the change among us women is that we're taking the power of those choices that were maybe enforced on us and saying, you know what, this is what I want to wear because I want to do it, not because somebody's telling me or society's pressuring me into it. So power to you in saying that, because I think that's exactly what from people and women that I've talked to, where we're at. Like, we're taking back the power of the choices that maybe were enforced on us. Now we're making them our own. And yeah, so power to you on that.
It's interesting when I go to the Middle East, and in Abu Dhabi, I've gotten to know a lot of really incredibly powerful women. They're unbelievable. And they wear an abaya in Abu Dhabi, and an abaya is a chiffon scarf, and it's sort of a long rectangle. They don't wrap it, but it sort of flows over their shoulder. And everybody thinks that they're forced to wear the abaya. And I thought, well, tradition, it's a traditional garb. In Abu Dhabi, they wear traditional garb. And then I saw women in action. And so we would notice this kind of thing. And I saw this thing happening that was so gorgeous and beautiful, but they were working this scarf in a way, in conversation, and in just their sort of most feminine way. And the scarf became sort of like a piece of jewelry or something that was an accessory to the way their hand gestures were, or the way the scarf went around their face. They were very aware of what they were doing, and I was mesmerized by it, and I thought, I want to learn how to do that. That is so incredible. And so I was at a mosque, and in this mosque you had to dress head to toe in traditional garb, and this woman gave me a beautiful abaya with little stones at the bottom of it, and I was like, this is so empowering. Nobody would believe me if I told them how great I feel. They're looking at my face. They're talking to me. They're not looking at anything else. And I had a deep understanding of the power of the reverse of what you think is feminism. And it was just a great visual, and I will never forget it. I tried very hard. I need lessons, though, to take it further. And their eyes and everything about what they were doing was saying, this is my intent. This is my intent.
Well, I think those kind of diversity of perspectives on fashion and gender identity is what this conversation has been about. So I think we could wrap it up on that note and exposing ourselves to different views or experiences than maybe we have thought we would find ourselves in through fashion or whatnot. So if there's anything we left out that you want to throw in, be my guest.
How to close up? Oh my God, it's so much pressure. I could tell. No, I was going to say, can I tell another Norma story? Well, you brought up the 70s, and I have to say, one of the other big revelations for Norma is that she's so kind of low-key. And I remember once her very casually talking about how John and Yoko used to come to her store and just, shop for an afternoon. And, John would sort of sit in his chair and watch Yoko trying on clothes, and I'm just sitting there like, I can't believe this person has had these experiences and these interactions with people that have had revolutionary impact in culture. And I think that's something that Norma does, and she sets such an incredible example for young women like you and me, is that she sort of reminds us that we, with the abaya, it's like we make it our own. We have this opportunity to make things our own. And I think that is just an extraordinary message, and I just think it's really important. Yeah.
I have one thing. I want to thank. There's a woman in the audience, Mary Lou Luther, who.
Where are you, Mary Lou?
Right here.
Oh, hi.
So when I decided to go on my own, Mary Lou Luther, and I had $98 to my name. Mary Lou Luther got me sewing machines. So I am indebted for life. So mentor, we have our mentors. We have those people who help us, and we have to continue and help other people. So thank you, Mary Lou.
Well, that is a perfect note to wrap up on. So thank you so much for being such inspirations, and thank you all again for coming out tonight. So thank you.